pause the recording. Welcome everybody. There'll be a few people kind of coming on slowly, and welcome to our EQUUS Ask Me Anything series that happens every month, and we explore all kinds of juicy topics, and there's pretty much nowhere that we won't go. I'm really excited about our guest today and our discussion today. And before I introduce our guest, just a couple of things. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be shared. And so if for some reason there's any point in this discussion where you have something you want to share and you have a question you want to ask, but you're not comfortable being recorded, just let me know, and I will pause us for the time being, and then we can record after that. And just some basic housekeeping around Zoom, turn off your mic or mute your mic if you've got some background noise. If you're doing a lot of movement and stuff, or you're going to another room, just turn your camera off temporarily so we don't take that ride with you and end up car sick in some way. And yeah, I'm just gonna stop here and introduce you to Angelita, who is our guest. And I think I'm gonna put the view as a speaker view, so that Angelita, if you wouldn't mind just waving, let everybody know you're there. Everybody else, if you could put your mic, mute your mic. And Angelita comes to us from Brooklyn. She is a dear friend of an EQUUS faculty member and team member, Mark Woodward, who is our photographer, and just family member. And so I have personally known about Angelita's journey for a long time and have known her from a distance. And so it's just really nice to see you here in this space. And thank you so much for just dedicating some time to this. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that very warm welcome. Yes, I'm a very good friend of Mark's. I've known Mark since, I guess, college, and Mark had documented my transition with me over photography for years and still going. So we're always in transition. So there's always something to capture. So yeah, it's so nice to meet all of you. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a great organization, and I'm really excited to do this AMA with you. So Angelita Romero, she, her, hers, those are my pronouns. We'll be talking a little bit about pronouns, the usage of them, amongst other things as well in the trans spectrum. So this is kind of a trans 101 kind of short little convo. I did put together some slides, so I do want to kind of go over those first with everybody, and then open the floor up for any questions that you all have, and I'm happy to answer them. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Let's see if this actually works. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to make sure I can still see everybody's face too. Let's see here. Ooh. I want to make sure I get like a nice large grid. There we go. Okay, and can everybody see the screen? Thumbs up. Yeah, perfect. Amazing. I'm going to have the chat open as well, just so I can see. But please drop any questions in there too, and I will try to answer them as we go along, as they pertain to each slide. And then if I don't get to it, just know we'll get to all the questions too afterwards. So let me go ahead and start this. Okay, welcome to the Trans AMA. Happy Pride Month also to everybody who celebrates Pride Month. Super exciting. I love that this is happening right in the middle of it. So today we're going to talk about a little bit about identifying difference between gender and sex. I'll kind of briefly go over the gender unicorn. It's this drawing that a friend of mine put together, and I thought it was just a really great way to kind of understand gender and sex. And then understanding the acronym, what is LGBTQIA+? It's a long acronym, things keep getting added all the time. And so I'm sure for everybody, it's hard to keep up with all of the terminology, but we do our best, I think. And that's the best way to approach it, is to just approach it with a level of grace and understanding. And understanding what allyship is. So kind of separating it from the acronym and really understanding what allyship is compared to what LGBTQIA+ is. And then we'll go over a little bit about pronouns, some terms to know, some terms to generally avoid. And then we'll open it up for a little Q&A. Any questions so far? All right, sweet. So gender versus sex. So some terms, we have binary, which is relating to, composed of, or involving two things. Gender binary, which just relates to the societal misconception that there are only two genders. The sex binary, which is societal misconception that there are only two sexes. So what is gender? Gender is a social construct. It's how your identity relates to society's idea of what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman, neither, both, a mix of the genders. Gender is a broad spectrum. So I like to think of it as just something on a line. You have like hyper masculine at one end, hyper feminine at the other end, and somewhere in between is where we all kind of float. Some days you might feel more feminine, some days you might feel more masculine. And then also gender expression, which we'll touch a little bit about later, is also how you present, gender presentation. And it's how you present those internal feelings of what society perceives as gender. And then what is sex assignment? So sex assigned at birth is usually what we refer to it as. Sex assignment is a legal and medical designation based on a physical assessment of a newborn's external anatomy at birth by a medical professional. And then we have binary sex assignment. So male or AMAB is assigned male at birth, and then female AFAB is assigned female at birth. And here's a really fun gender unicorn that I love. So this is a great little representation. In the mind, we have the gender identity, where it can range from female, woman, girl to male, man or boy, and then somewhere in between other genders. So anything that somebody kind of relates to or feels gravitational pull towards. And then gender expression is what we present as. So there's feminine, masculine, or other, anything in between. It's how we present ourselves, whether you want to wear lipstick for the day or put on some earrings or put on a hat with a feather in it or something like that. So, things that we just have come up with over the years as a society, and how we relate those to gender. So that's your expression. Sex assigned at birth. So we have female, male, and then other or intersex. And intersex, a lot of you may know or may not know, but intersex is a medical condition where the newborn, it has both male and female genitalia, anywhere in between. It could be anything from undescended testicles with, a vulva, or a phallus with internal ovaries, something like that. So there are a bunch of medical conditions that have all of this in it, and that's what we call intersex. And then in the heart, you'll see there's physical attraction to men, women, or other genders, and then we have emotional attraction to men, women, or other genders as well in there. So it's just a fun little diagram of kind of what we understand as gender and sex. Understanding the acronym. So LGBTQIA+ is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer and questioning, intersex, and then we have asexual and aromantic. So the A is not for ally. I think a lot of people misconstrue that or think that A stands for ally, but in fact, it actually stands for asexual. And then we have transgender. So trans, which is the umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or expression is different from cultural expectations based on the sex assigned at birth. And then cisgender is what we use to describe people whose gender identity aligns with the sex assigned with them at birth. So cis and trans You see this in medicine as well. I don't know if anybody has taken organic chemistry or chemistry in general, but a big part of it is understanding DNA and how it works. And so the cis is is one form of the DNA, and then if you flip it, that's the trans. So another kind of way to understand where these terms come from. And then allyship. So ally is a verb, not an identity. I love this acronym. I just thought it was super, super helpful to kind of break it up. And act, which would be to confront and interrupt, show up and speak up, listen. So trust marginalized people's lived experiences, don't invalidate them. Learn, ask questions, be curious, do your own research, but also, I think opening up the space to learning about somebody. I think a lot of our tension in society comes from fear of the unknown and not really understanding somebody, and then being afraid to be wrong. And so it's okay to be wrong. I mess up all the time. Everybody I know messes up all the time. We all mess up. It's how you put together those pieces. And I think how you come back from that and how you learn from it, that's the most important thing. And then we have yield. So being aware of how much space you are occupying and resisting the urge to save people. So resisting that knight on the white horse complex that a lot of us sometimes feel at times is necessary, but sometimes it can actually just be harmful in the end. Okay. And then SOGI. So what is SOGI? We have sexual orientation, which is different than gender identity, which is different than gender expression. So it's a little acronym to explore those. Sexual orientation refers to patterns of attraction. And then gender identity is what you feel or your internal sense of gender. Gender expression is how a person outwardly expresses their gender or lack thereof. And then 2 notes too: sexuality and gender are spectrums of orientation, attraction, and identity. And gender and sexual identities may change over time and are fluid, but are always valid. So I think, allowing people to change over time, even if, say, somebody comes out as trans and they decide that they're going to do one thing and they want to explore that realm, but they decide along the way that there are other parts of it that they want to explore. Giving people the opportunity and the freedom to express themselves and to change, I think is really powerful. And I think we all need that. We all need those chances to just feel free to explore and feel free to change our minds if we want to, or if it feels right. And that isn't a wrong thing. There is no wrong in that. So giving people that opportunity and that freedom is super important and validating. Pronouns. Why are pronouns important? For many trans and gender diverse people, using correct pronouns is a very important and validating part of gender affirmation. So using the person's chosen name and their pronouns is a sign of mutual respect. And it's really important to remember that gender identity is something that is not visible. It's the internal sense of one's own gender. So a great way to start a conversation with somebody that you might not know what their gender identity is to introduce yourself first. Give them your name, your pronouns, kind of just intro yourself as if you were asking them questions about what you would want to find out about that. Hello, my name is blank and my pronouns are blank. And then asking what's your name and pronouns. So never assuming anything just based on somebody's gender expression also. Somebody might choose to use completely different pronouns. And a lot of the time too, as we evolve and as we're continuously pushing the limits and the boundaries on what we think is, societally acceptable within our language, and using they, them pronouns or any kind of other pronoun that people choose to use, Zer, etc. It really is important to just keep that conversation open. And it also challenges yourself too. It also makes the person asking those questions think about it for themselves too, and challenge your own gender expectations and beliefs based on what you were taught growing up. You know, we all have different backgrounds, different ways that we were raised, and so challenging that is always, I think, a push towards evolution and evolving your own sense of self. So ways to create an inclusive space are to use gender neutral terms and phrases. So a great example is y'all, instead of saying, hey guys, or calling somebody dude, or, you know, of course, these are expressions that people sometimes feel safe to use within their own environments too. And that's totally fine. If you have friends who don't mind that, and you know that, but in, you know, in public spheres or in areas where that might not be something safe for everybody, then just use gender neutral terms. It's always a great default. So pronoun chart, this is just a handy little chart, again, from the same organization I pulled the other one from. And it just lists, basically, we have she, her, hers, herself. Of course, we know he, him, his, himself. And we use they, them, theirs, themself as well to identify larger groups of people too, but we also use it to identify gender non-binary or gender fluid people as well. And then of course, Z, zers, zers, here, here's, and here self. So this is just there are examples on the right-hand side that you can see. And you know, it's really important. I think it's really important to just keep in mind, you know, if you're confused about something, or if you have questions when it comes to using they, them, theirs pronouns, I know a lot of people do. It's, you know, we've been using that as a term for such a long time in our language. And we often use it as a singular, in the singular sense. So like somebody goes up and they're like, hey, did you get, you know, did somebody turn in their phone for them? We've used it for a very long time. And I think it's important to remember that has been used as a singular term. So in any sense, I think just giving grace to that phrase. I know a lot of people have a lot of struggle with using that. I know I have family members who don't understand the concept of they, them, and theirs, and have a little bit of pushback because it's, you know, they think that it's identifying a large group of people, when in reality, it could be identifying a singular person. So that is an example of that one. Any questions so far? I know I'm breezing past a lot of this stuff, but there's a lot to unpack, I'm sure. Okay, awesome. And then some terms to know, some great terms. So chosen name, the name a person elects to be called. Their dead name, which is a name that's assigned to them at birth. We have gender dysphoria. So it's the distress caused by the incongruence between one's gender identity and other aspects of gender. We have cis assumed, which is a new term for passing. I don't know if a lot of you have heard the term passing before, but it's the phrase that we've used to say that somebody's being perceived as being cisgender. So cis assumed is the new term for that. And then we have transgender, which is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity is different than the sex assigned at birth. We have cisgender, used to describe people whose gender identity aligns with a sex assigned to them at birth. Non-binary, I don't know where that went. There's something missing there. I think maybe the lettering got a little bit mixed up. But we have gender nonconforming, which is identifying outside traditional gender expectations and norms. Similar to the example that I was using earlier for they, them, their, or zers, zers, or here or yourself. And terms to avoid generally, we have she, male, he, she, tranny, transsexual, calling somebody a transgender versus a transgender person, hermaphrodite, full transition, or saying somebody that has fully transitioned. You know, there's not really one way to transition in society, or for somebody's own personal journey. You know, we are all, I think, on our own spectrum again. And so just really acknowledging that somebody who transitions is not always going to transition the same way that another trans person will. You know, somebody might get bottom surgery, somebody might not. And that's totally fine. And that's completely acceptable. And if they decide that their gender identity is whatever they choose, then that should be respected. And then transvestite, which is definitely a term that was used in a very derogatory sense, I think, for many years. But a caveat to this is also, if somebody who is within that community does ask to be referred to as one of these terms, I've met people who do prefer to be referred to as hermaphrodite or a transvestite, and that is completely fine. And, acknowledging that that is okay to use that term when somebody does self-identify as that. And that is pretty much the general gist of what I wanted to go over. I know that was a lot of information, and I'm happy to go back to any slide to kind of talk about a little bit more in depth on some of those things. But that was just a little brief overview on some of the terminology that I think might help spark a little conversation, hopefully. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see all of your lovely faces.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to go gallery view because we can we can open the floor to questions. I know that some people have written in advance with some questions that they're posing, but I think I'm going to wait for those and open the floor now for anybody. Hi, Roz, welcome. Glad that you could be here with us.
Thank you. Thank you. And I just want to share that the reason I'm all messed up and that I was late is that I'm at the hospital and my oldest child is getting top surgery as we speak.
Yay!
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, that's so exciting. Oh my
Yeah.
God.
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's so nerve-wracking too. So
Oh,
I'm sure
it's, it's like, whoa.
definitely. Yeah, it's definitely a different headspace that somebody's in when they're at the hospital waiting for.
Yeah, it's a little different. So, but anyway, I thought this was really well timed. So
Great. Yes.
you can ask me anything too, because I've had a big education.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Great.
That's
amazing.
wonderful, Roz. Thank you for offering yourself, because there
Yeah.
may be some questions that end up circling through to you as well, just because you're in a different place in this journey. So a question that came through is, what are some ways that we can make the workplace more supportive for transgender people?
I think going off of kind of what that slide was saying in terms of, really identifying yourself first when you're talking to anybody who you're working with, and acknowledging these things and using them in your own vocabulary and your own everyday life, that automatically opens the floor up for everybody else really feeling like they have the ability to also use that same language. And so I think for a lot of people, a lot of times it really comes from a top-down level too, of, executive level training or senior manager level training in the workplace, where people really respond to the safety net that's created by those people, because that's who you're trusting. That's who you go to work for every day. You're working underneath superiors, and you're working there is a hierarchy that I think definitely needs to be acknowledged on a day-to-day too, in terms of the expectation that we set for those people who are leading our teams. And I think when that person does show respect just out of their own use of vocabulary and their own language, then it really does make people feel like they're able to open up and feel like they're able to talk about those kind of topics and those items. So I think that is a huge step in creating a safe space in the workplace for trans people. And also just, holding space for folks. So really just creating your own space. A lot of people are working in a virtual environment now, so it is really difficult. And I think that has posed a lot of challenges for organizations and for a lot of people online who are working. I work at a remote telehealth company for trans healthcare, and even in that environment, it's hard to hold space for people every single day, and it's hard to really understand where somebody's at in regards to their gender identity or anything else. So just holding space and keeping yourself accountable is a really big step, I think, in the positive.
Can I add to that, if that's okay?
Yeah.
I work at a global company, and it's Volvo Group, and it's the truck part, not the car part. But I don't know how it got organized, but the group has organized a group of LGBTQ people plus their allies. And I think having the allies is a really big piece of it, because then they can step out of the role of having to educate everyone if they've got good allies who can come in and correct people when they use the wrong pronouns, and explain why it's important, and all of that. So at the workplace, if you can create a few allies and ask them to help, I think it goes a long way to just spreading that word, because you might not have a management training program, or you might not be in a position to put one in place. But if you can start creating that network, I think that helps a lot.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think allyship is so underrated. And I think there's so much to be said for people who, who aren't just bystanders. The bystander effect really, it really affects everybody, and it goes so deeply, and it really comes into play, especially with trans issues too. And so not being a bystander and being somebody who's actively standing up for other people, and acknowledging your own privilege and power in that situation too, really, I think, helps and really can improve the workplace and improve the environment that you're in. So absolutely 100% allyship is of the utmost importance for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there are so many ways too. There are so many ways that you can, I think, improve a work environment. Hosting talkback sessions like this, or hosting, having speakers come in and opening up dialogue, and just creating those spaces again where people can talk openly and freely without it being in the typical work sense, can help to really foster that environment and foster that conversation, and allow for people to, go back to their departments and continue the conversation, and to hold that space within their own work too. So it just, I think it pays it forward every time that you do something like that.
Yep.
So a question here, what should I do if someone comes out to me as trans?
I think the first thing to do is acknowledge it and accept it, and just, I think it also depends. It's such a scary thing for so many people who don't really know what this involves. And so I think that understanding that for a lot of people, they immediately think surgery. This person's going to, undergo lots of surgery, or they're going to, have a lot of difficulty just living. And I think that's like a fear. There are different reactions. There are fear-based reactions, or, it really depends on who you're talking to. So, if you're a parent, I know, for instance, my mother, when I first told her, she was terrified. She was like, can you, what? Like, hold, pause, please. Like, you don't need to, do all that. You're fine. You're perfect. You're beautiful. But, it's understanding that everybody is going to have a completely different reaction. And you're not the only person who's transitioning through. Everybody who is transitioning with you through this whole entire process. And again, allowing space and giving that grace to people who just don't really understand or don't know. And that's not, they haven't had to, they haven't been taught this. We don't learn this in, sex ed in middle school. Hopefully that's changing. I hope they are teaching these kind of things now, but when I was going through it, we were separated into boys and girls and completely given like much different explanations of everything. So, that still exists, and we still have so much to undo and so much, trauma that's caused by those kind of situations. And a lot of people don't feel like they're able to open up. So I think understanding the other person's perspective when you're talking to them about it too, and just creating a dialogue. We can learn from each other. I think it's such an important part of being a human, and understanding that somebody might know a little bit more about this situation than you do. The person who you're talking to probably has done enormous amounts of research for their own self and for themselves. So really just I think trust is a huge thing. A lot of people have trust issues. I'm certainly one of them. And, I don't think anybody is ever going to escape that, but trusting that somebody knows what they're talking about or what they're going through, and also just supporting them. Support. It's the biggest thing that you can give to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And just being able to listen, actively listening and responding, I think it's so easy to shut down, and it's so easy to, try to speak over somebody or not really hear them when they're talking to you. And so really just sitting, listening, and taking in what the other person has to offer can really make the other person feel safe when they're coming to talk to you.
I have a personal question. I don't even know if it's a question, but sort of the veil lifted when that whole idea of the binary was shown just not to be true, and the spectrum then was more true. So is there any kind of when did culture come in and go binary? Was it through colonization? Was it religion? Was there a time before where that really wasn't the deal? I'm always curious about the sorts of trances that, modern humans end up adopting, and when those trances come on, because this isn't anything new. This isn't some fad that people think is happening, right? This is not a new development. So I wondered if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. Do you mind clarifying the question? I just a little bit, just so
if you do you have any information about when sort of in the span of human history,
right,
when that kind of period of time came in and said boy and girl, and all of history was told through a boy or a girl, mostly a boy, but that there was a time before where that really wasn't the case, and certainly now that's changing again. So in some ways this insight is new, but in some ways I imagine it's not new.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, you look back at, the 20s and the early 1900s in Germany or Amsterdam or Berlin, and you see, you look back at history, and there are so many ways that people were expressing their gender in a completely open format. Mm-hmm. And in a completely open way. There were cabarets, there were nightclubs, it was a huge thing. And I think we look back at those times, and if we had, I think, a larger catalog of history, and we're able to, have video cameras back then, that would have been great. But, we only have what we were able to access. But, there were men playing women on stage, of course, that had to deal with a lot of patriarchal issues and a lot of reasons why that was occurring. But there were people who were expressing their gender completely differently than how we would see that today. Mm-hmm. And I think we're having that same kind of evolution again. And history really does repeat itself in these cycles if you look through and you see these patterns. But to answer a little bit more clearly, to answer the question, I guess, really, I feel like after World War II, it was a huge shift within society and within kind of sex expectations, especially for the US too. and having that kind of like nuclear family and really identifying, you know, like men and women and their roles in society and what we're expected to do and what we're expected to, how we're expected to live our lives in order to function as the, I guess, nuclear society, as we could call it. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely shifting. I think we're going away from that, which thank goodness, and shifting to a little bit more freedom and a little bit more just allowance of expression. And I think we're headed towards the right way. Of course, we have, again, so much work to do, but I think that was the shift in my mind. I could be totally wrong and totally off base, but
Yeah. Yes.
yeah.
Susan.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Oh, I
You're
think you're
muted,
muted.
Susan.
I do that all the time, so don't worry.
Me too. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. This just feels so wonderful being with all of you this evening.
Oh,
I'm in a situation where my partner, who is a man, who's been my partner for the last 7 years, his daughter came out to me about 2 months ago as being trans male. And I've learned a good deal since she confided in me. But part of the reason that she confided in me is because and I'm still using she and her because she has not yet come out to her father, and I can't juggle 2 sets of pronouns right now. So it's not out of disrespect for he, Mello, the name he has chosen, but I can't be bouncing between pronouns. So I'm still going to refer to his daughter as she. Her father is a very dear, loving man. He's been devoted to his daughter, who has muscular dystrophy and is confined to a wheelchair for his whole life. And he loves her infinitely. However, he has what I would characterize as a repulsed and violent reaction to transgender. He has, it's a blind spot. And so his daughter is very much afraid that this will be the end of their relationship, that he will never speak to her again, that he will disown her. And part of the reason, again, that she confided in me is because she intends to tell him, but she wants me to be there to support him when that happens. And so what I really would welcome, I've been finding what I can, but what I really would welcome is any advice that you might have for me. I'm more concerned about the father than the daughter. She has good resources in place. She has a good community in place. She knows what it is to be marginalized. She's been in a wheelchair her whole life. She knows what she's doing. She's confident in what she's doing. But I'm really, if there are any suggestions that you have for helping the parent of a transgender person who is, from what you described, perhaps more, it sounds like it will be, it sounds like your mother had a strong reaction, but this is,
Yeah.
he truly is, he finds it repulsive, doesn't believe in it. There's no such thing as transgender. So if there's anything you have to offer,
Yeah.
resources.
First of all, thank you for sharing that story, Susan, and thank you for being an ally to this wonderful person. That's, you know, an amazing it's amazing to have somebody like that, I think, in your life. And so
Honor.
they're very lucky. And, you know, I think there are a lot of resources. I think the number one thing that I have heard really helps families who have a lot of struggles and a lot of issues with these topics, and dealing with it internally and emotionally themselves. There are a lot of really great family support groups. And I think hearing how other families have handled their own children coming out and their own children going through transitions, it really helps. And it really helps to see other people as role models too. You know, I think a lot of it comes from, and especially for men, comes from this kind of toxic masculinity that we built up as a society. There are no role models really to look at. There are no, you know, father figures in media that we can see who accept their trans sons going through a transition, or their trans daughters going through a transition. And so a lot of it, I think,
if I can say this without offending anyone, I hope I can. I feel like partly it's rooted in some misguided Catholic shit.
yeah, absolutely. Religion has such a huge part, I think, sometimes too, and deconstructing that. And I think separating the religion from what your child is actually going through in a medical sense, and understanding the science and the medicine behind it too, and why people feel the way that they do, and are going through the things that they're going through, I think really helps as well. So I'm happy to share, there are some really great resources, and I'm happy to send them your way, of family support groups and chats. And, you know, I think talking through it and seeing other people handle it in a really emotionally supportive and sensitive and welcoming way would really help this person, I think, understand it a little bit better and have some more empathy towards this person. You never really know until somebody goes through something like this. So, I mean, even personally, you know, my whole family, there were like no LGBT people in my family prior to me coming out. And nobody had even heard of what trans was when I came out, when I did. And, you know, drag queens, sure. RuPaul's Drag Race, sure. That was it. That was really the extent of what we understood. And even what I understood, I had no idea. At this point, it was still an underground community. And it's still, even to today, it still feels like an underground community in a lot of ways. Just because I think a lot of people feel like they have to be underground to be able to survive. But I think, you know, really just understanding that when it happens to you, when it happens to your kid, the reaction could be completely different. And you never know how somebody is going to react. You know, that was the biggest thing holding me back from transitioning, was being afraid of how my family was going to react. I come from like a Spanish Catholic background, so I totally get it. There's like a giant cross with Jesus hanging and bleeding in my family's living room. So I totally understand. And there's a lot of fear around that. But I think, you know, the biggest advice too, that I think you could give to this person, give to Mela, would be to just be patient with the person that they're walking through this with. You know, if they really do love them as you're saying that they do, and support them as you're saying that they do, you never know how that person's mentality is going to change and shift over the years. There are people in my family, I think, who are still shifting and changing as we go along. But the more that you talk about it, and the more that you bring it up at home, you know, just as you would over dinner with your family on any other occasion, really helps. So I hope that helps. I hope that was any kind of advice I could give possible.
I'm so very grateful, and I look forward to whatever resources you can send my way or direct me to.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you again for sharing your story. That was really touching. Does anybody else have any follow-up? And that was a story. So I don't know if anybody else has any, but
I think it's a really it's a tough situation because you don't know how people are going to react. And one thing that I found out is sometimes the people who I thought were going to be the most accepting were the ones who were the most taken aback and had a harder time with it. So, you know, just holding space for them to, and it, you know, he's probably lived in this kind of little box of his world for a long time, this binary box for a very long time. And so he needs some time to process what's going on. So yeah, holding space, and if he gets mad or whatever, just realize that he's got emotions too, and that they count just as much. But with time, if he loves his child, you know, he'll come around, I think. But a little bit of patience on both sides goes a long way. And thank you so much for being that support person that they have going through this transition.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I truly feel honored.
It's amazing. It's really, that is a really amazing thing to do for somebody, Susan. So yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't
Andrew,
have-
you had a question. Oh, for some reason you're muted, or we don't hear you. You're not muted, but we don't hear you.
I think your headphones might be connected wrong.
Better.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for the diagnosis. Yeah, I do have a question, but it's much more sort of tactical. And following Susan's comments, I'm feeling very awkward asking it, but I'll put it on anyway. So I'm not. This is the first time I've heard of here and zir. So can you tell me, and maybe you did, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but it would help me to grok, like, where does that come from?
Yeah,
It does come from a specific traceable place.
Sure. These pronouns actually, I heard of ze, zir, zim, and here, self, etc. Those came actually, I think, prior to even they, them, theirs as being like a really big thing. When I was in college, I know that they were kind of being used as like the first, like, kind of boundary pushing gender expression terms. But they never really caught on unless you were within the community, or unless you were within like a larger metropolitan city that used it a lot more, or you were around people who, a larger group of centralized individuals who identified as trans. I think the reason that they, them, and theirs really started catching on as like the gender non-conforming pronoun is it's something that we have used every day as something to identify somebody without using a gendered term. But the zism, it was a term, I think, and a pronoun that has been in use for even longer than they, them, theirs as a gender neutral pronoun. So yeah, it's, and there are so many more. I mean, there are like fae, fair. There are so many other gender neutral terms and gender expressive terms that have come about. Probably even today, there are more as we speak, more being created.
So zir is gender neutral, just like they or them, and who decides how they use it is the person, and they tell you what their preferred pronoun is, and that's how you refer to them. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, and I'll add, when my child first came out, they told me you can use they, them, or if you would rather use zir, you can do that. And in my little brain, at first, I thought zir would be easier because they, them was plural. I had that roadblock in front of me.
Sure.
But in the end, nobody knew what the other was. So if I used them, you know, my
Right.
friends would look at me like, what? And so then when I used when I used they them, it just became way easier to use they them for me. But it's, you know, and my child was like, you know, I don't care, just don't use she, her, you know. And I'm like, okay, got you.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And a lot of people are using a multitude, you know, some people are
Yeah.
using she, they, or
Yeah,
she,
yeah.
et cetera. So I think we're really expanding how we think of, you know, gender expression and our terms that we use for people, and really pushing the boundaries on it. And, you know, I think a good example too, I was out to dinner recently with some friends of mine who are trans feminine identifying. And one of them, she's been out for years and transitioned in the 90s, and is you know, a huge advocate within the community. And I just, even just saying like to the other people that we were with, even though they presented very much as female and you know, have been in film and TV and have done roles that are female, et cetera. They, you know, I wanted to open the floor up, and I was like, what are your pronouns? You know, like, what are we all working with here at the table? You know? So, and they were taken like completely aback. And my friend who was in her 60s, you know, she, I think even still has this mentality of, you know, being, having to have fought for so many years to just transition into the binary trans world, which we all know of at this point. And for a lot of people who transitioned back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, that is very real for them. They had to be hyper feminine or hyper masculine in order to just be accepted into society. And so a lot of that still exists. And a lot of that is still, it's only within the last 5 years, really last 5-6 years, that we've been really using these terms broadly and exploring them. And especially through COVID, since we've been able to be at home and be behind screens, and we have like a sort of safety, weird virtual safety net, to try out these new pronouns and to you know, explore our own gender identity and talk about it more freely. But I think it's really important to keep in mind that a lot of people did not, and they still have internalized trauma from the years that they were having to be one way or the other. So again, just understanding internalized trauma and what it means for somebody could be completely different than what it means for another person.
We have time for one more question. I have a few more that came in, but I would want to give space to anybody who's actually here in the room. Yeah. Okay, then I'm going to ask it here.
Perfect.
What are the biggest issues facing the trans community in healthcare? And what is the correct way to talk about someone's history before they came out as trans? That's a big question. Okay, over to you.
You know, transness and healthcare, sometimes they go very much hand in hand. And I've worked in healthcare for, I guess now it's been like 10 years within the trans healthcare field. And again, it's evolved so much. I mean, even just coming out I came out in 2012, and coming out, going through that, you know, doing all of my surgeries, 2013, 2014, doing it all with my college, and going through that was completely different then than it is today, or even 2 years ago. And doing it back in the early 2000s, I'm sure was a completely different story for other people as well. You know, I at least had like YouTube and things to go to and videos to watch, and I was able to compile all my research. And so a lot has happened in the trans healthcare field. You know, we're pushing a lot of boundaries. We're going we're doing so much more research. We're talking about it so much more. There's just been a huge evolution in terms of how we train medical professionals. There are programs popping up everywhere, and teachers who are teaching these things and keeping everything going, and new generations of doctors who are coming in, and researchers and other experts in the field who continuously push those boundaries. And so I think it's evolving so quickly as technology evolves too, and as science evolves. And so I think, I'm just excited to see what happens further down the line. They're growing penises in labs and doing a bunch of stuff. So it's pretty amazing. One of my favorite quotes is a good friend of mine. She's a surgeon and a doctor, and she said, "I would hate to be the night watchman at that laboratory." So I thought that was absolutely hilarious and really fantastic. But it's great. I think these things are really wonderful, and the more that we continuously push our boundaries within medicine, it's wonderful to see. And the second part of your question, you had another part of your question.
Yes. And what is the correct way to talk about someone's history before they came out as trans?
To be honest, I think it differs for so many people. It's definitely case by case. And I think it always helps to talk to the person and ask them how they prefer. But a great default is to talk about them in their current gender expression. So however they choose to identify at that time is usually the best way to talk about them in the past. It causes a lot less, less trauma, less tension. There are less triggers that happen for the person. So the more supportive and more welcoming you can be while that person is starting out their journey, wherever they are within their transition, the better. So that's a great default. Again, for everybody, it's completely different. Some people, like to separate that. Some people enjoy being like, when I was born in this body, or refer to me as like he, him, for when you're talking about my youth, etc. And like are more rooted in their transness and are okay identifying that way, then that's totally fine. And that are not, I hate saying more rooted in their transness. I guess that's not a great way, but are okay using those terms and using their dead name or using their dead pronouns to identify themselves. And that's another way that you can, but again, defaulting to just having a conversation and just asking, be curious. It's a sign of respect, I think, than it is demeaning to the person. And I've never once been offended when somebody is just taking the time out to even just try to understand who I am or ask my pronouns. I just think it shows me that they care about this and that they're open to it and that they're critically thinking about these things. So I think it's a great way to get things going.
I just feel, I really want to say to you, thank you. And watching you and listening to you and being with you makes me so happy for Mello that she is embracing her truth. I look at you and I see,
Yes, in the gendered expression way. There you go. Yeah, in my gender.
I just see happiness ahead for someone I love very much. So this has just been a huge, you have been a huge blessing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's honestly my pleasure. You all are fantastic. And I really appreciate all of the questions and the comments. And, I'm not an expert. I don't think any of us will ever be experts in this field or whatever we're talking about. We can constantly learn from each other too. And so I really appreciate talking with all of you and hearing what you all have to say. It's really wonderful. And thank you all for being so supportive to each person that you're with. Roz, incredible person, being there for for your child's top surgery, you know, and Susan for being there for Mello. It's watching this and hearing, excuse the loud noise, it's New York, I'm so sorry. But hearing everybody talk about it and be supportive with their families, that's the, you know, lead with love. That's all we can do.
Lead with love. That is a perfect place to and way to end our AMA. Thank you so much, Angelita. Thank you for your time. And thank all of you for coming. And a recording will be sent to you, and we'll probably compile some resources for all of you as well and send them out. And just keep in touch with all of us at EQUUS Inspired. And thank you again, and good night, everybody, and thanks.
Absolutely. Have a good night. Thank you.
Bye.
Nice to see you.
You too.